Many of us as writers, we start stories so often that we probably lose count. We write so many outlines for stories that we never actually write, or we just put down something really basic to help us remember that story idea. But what takes you from the story idea to the outline to starting the novel and then to finishing? What are the key characteristics that you can identify? I'll discuss that next. So when I'm writing or starting a novel, it begins with an idea for me. And that idea can be sparked by any number of things. It could be sparked by a person that I met. It could be sparked by a conversation that I had with a person. It could be sparked by something that's going on in the news, or a movie that I watched, a TV show that I watched, or a book that I read. It could be anything that can spark something that makes me want to run to grab a piece of paper and a pen, or to type it into an email message and email it to myself, put it in Google Docs, put it in Microsoft Word, wherever it is that is accessible to me that I can use to document the story idea that popped in my head. I'll go to it. And I've done all of the aforementioned and probably some other ways too that I'm not really immediately thinking about right now. But what takes me from the point of this story idea to writing the outline? And typically for me, it's going to be a compelling character or some kind of situation that I think is worthy of telling a great story. And if those two things mix together, then that's all the more reason why I'm probably going to not only going to start an outline sparked by the story idea, but that's probably going to take me to the point of actually starting the novel. And so it's important to really have your eyes open, your ears open, and to be looking for story ideas wherever they exist. And when you get that story idea to pop in your head, write it down. Even if you never actually write the story, or if you start the story and you never actually finish it, at least get the idea down. I was watching a biography about Agatha Christie, and they recently, I shouldn't say recently, but they discovered at some point some ideas that she had been writing down in journals. And it was actually really fascinating to see that discovery made. And I thought about that and all the composition books that I have stories in, all the Microsoft Word files that I have stories started in that either I had just have an outline for, just have an idea for, or I have a partially started novel or a novella that I just never finished. So that begs the question, what are the reasons that I don't finish it? Now, for me, sometimes I go into like a sort of an ADD mode, and what I'm working on immediately, sometimes I'll stall. And usually when I stall, it's because I probably didn't flesh out the story well enough, and I usually didn't do the outline. Usually when I do an outline, chances are I'm going to finish that story at some point. And it's just a matter of finding the right time and hoping, I don't know if I should say hoping that a great story idea doesn't pop in my head, because actually you always want a great story idea to pop in your head. But sometimes that great story idea pops in your head, and I'll sometimes put the other story on the shelf and then come back to it later after I've fleshed out and either started or fully written that great idea that popped into my head. And so a lot of it is, for me, is just really coming up with a strong outline to accompany the story idea. And the strong outline is usually going to help me to structure it. Sometimes when I stall in writing a story, it's usually because I reach a point where you've got off to that red hot start where you're excited to get going and you get the idea in your head and you just start to put it down, but you don't have if you don't have the structure, then at some point you're probably going to stall, and then you have to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? And sometimes for me, that could be probably, 30 or 40 pages in where I hit that stall. But usually if I make it past like 40 single-spaced pages in Microsoft Word, usually if I make it past that point, then I'm going to finish it. It's just a matter of time before I'll finish it. But the chances are better that I'm going to finish it if I have come up with a good outline that I'm following, a good outline that really sets the stage, that I've really fully vetted the outline and I know where I'm going. I know where I started. I know where I'm going to be when I get to the second act, and I know how I'm going to finish the story in the end. And so there are going to things that are going to change throughout the course of the story, but once you have that good outline in place, that's your foundation that's going to help you to really be on steady ground. So when things do change or you decide you're going to go in a different direction, you at least have that foundation, that outline that's going to be your steadying force. And so you might decide that you want to veer off a course and go in a different direction. And sometimes a character develops over the course of a story. Sometimes it's a secondary character that develops into a great character. I had that once with a story I was writing where a secondary character was so strong that I had to tell myself not to make the story too much about that supporting character, that you distract from the story that is actually being written. And actually what I did with that supporting character that I really kind of became intrigued by is I actually wrote another story, a sequel to the story, but one that focused on that character that I really started to like over the course of the original story. And so that's something you can do sometimes to keep things fresh and to go in a different direction, is if you find those good characters that really just inspire you to push through to the end. But again, start with a great outline. And outlines, the importance of outlines cannot be overstated. They are essential to the success of your story, because if you don't have that structure in the beginning, I almost guarantee you're either going to stall at some point, or you're going to have an unfocused story that is going to just go in so many weird different directions, or it's going to go in a weird direction. You're not going to be able to get the train back on the tracks. And so work on that outline, really get that outline solidified before you get started. It's something that you're really going to thank yourself for as you persevere through to the end. But if you don't start with that outline, then again, it could go in a number of different directions. You could just outright stall, or you could go in weird directions because you're just not focused on where you want to go and how you're going to get there. So again, usually when I don't finish, it's because I didn't do a outline at all, or I didn't do a very good outline that really helped me to stay on track toward a solid finish. Even if I go in different directions, as I said before, if I have that outline in place, that's going to give me a better chance of finishing a focused story that tells a consistent story from start to finish, that's going to not only make sense to you, because sometimes your story makes sense to you, but it might not make sense to a reader. And so it's important that you follow that outline, so the outline at least has you on a track where you're making sense, where your story has a flow to it that will make sense to someone else. Now, you're always going to want to have your beta readers. You're going to want to have somebody to help you with editing. You're going to want to get additional eyes on your story, especially if you're looking to publish at some point. That's going to be very important. But if you start with that outline, you're going to have a smoother, better developed piece by the time you decide to go to someone that's a beta reader, that's going to be able to give you some neutral advice, some unbiased advice or input on what you've written. Or if you've gone to that stage and you feel like you're confident enough that you can go to a literary agent or an editor, you're going to be on much better footing. If you started with that outline is going to help you to really work your way through the story, a story that's going to make better sense because you've thought it through in the outline. That's going to give you a best chance possible of being successful writing your novel from start to finish.